The mark of the beast is already here, and we don't realize it. The church doesn't need a microchip to bear the mark. It already carries it in its bank accounts, boardrooms, and bulletins. Last Sunday, I sat in church as the pastor introduced a guest ministry set up outside. He told us how to give, how to donate, how to connect, how to partner. Then, after explaining the logistics coupled with the very real tax benefits, he added almost defensively, "Now remember, we're not talking about the government." But we were. We always are when we talk about donations, deductions, and receipts. Every QR code, every giving platform, every partner ministry under that tent operated inside the same legal framework that defines charitable giving in Caesar's economy. The irony was jarring. A pastor assuring the congregation that the government wasn't involved, while every structural and financial detail of that very act of worship was governed by the government's definitions. And in that moment, I saw something I couldn't unsee. The church doesn't need a microchip to bear the mark of the beast. It already carries it, not on its forehead or hand, but in its spreadsheets, budgets, and bylaws. The mark was never about technology. Revelation was never warning us about chips, barcodes, or implants. It was exposing a transfer of ownership. The Greek word charagma means engraving, an imprint of authority. It was the stamp of a ruler, a mark of possession. In Hebraic context, it's covenant language, a question of who you belong to. The mark of the beast, then, isn't a gadget. It's a system of allegiance. In the 1st century, under Emperor Decius, citizens were required to burn incense before Caesar and receive a libellus, a certificate of loyalty. Without it, you couldn't trade, buy, or sell. It was empire's way of enforcing worship through economic access. John saw this pattern for what it was, not a superstition, but a system. Political, religious, and economic forces intertwined, demanding loyalty that belongs to God alone. It was a counterfeit covenant, a mark not of the body, but of the heart. The modern libellus. The modern libellus doesn't bear the emperor's face, it bears a tax code. Under Section 501(c)(3) of the Internal Revenue Code, churches that register, though not required to, receive official recognition as tax-exempt organizations, but only under specific conditions. All Section 501(c)(3) organizations are absolutely prohibited from directly or indirectly participating in or intervening in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for elective public office. IRS policy on political campaign intervention. That single sentence quietly defines the limits of what most pastors will ever say from the pulpit. The sword of Caesar now hangs invisible above every sermon that might sound too political. The pulpit that once rebuked kings now moderates its language to preserve exemption. The prophet who once cried out against injustice now calculates risk before speaking. And the church, once dangerous to the empire, now exists comfortably within it. We're not talking about government, but we are. The pastor in that parking lot wasn't deceptive. He was careful. He wanted people to give, to partner, to engage, but to feel safe doing so. He thought he was clarifying boundaries. What he was really doing was confessing them. Because every layer of the modern giving system, every receipt, every processing fee, every compliance clause, operates under the same civic definitions that regulate non-profits, not discipleship. He didn't mention 501(c)(3, but he didn't have to. The structure was already in place, invisible but determinative. The government doesn't need to stand in the sanctuary. It already owns the floor plan. And that's the quiet surrender of our age. Captivity not by persecution, but by partnership. The forehead and the hand. In Hebraic thought, the forehead represents conviction, the inner life of belief, reflection, and memory. The hand represents deed, work, participation, and expression. When Revelation says the beast marks both, it's describing formation, not fantasy. Empire shapes how you think and what you do. Belief and behavior branded together. The forehead, belief. When churches begin to think like corporations, define holiness by compliance, and treat silence as wisdom. The hand, deed. When churches begin to act like institutions, governed by risk analysis rather than revelation, preserving policy over prophecy. The mark is not futuristic, it's administrative. It doesn't brand skin, it disciplines souls. The economic mark, 97% inward, 3% outward. Nowhere is this clearer than in the numbers. According to studies from Giving USA, ECFA, and Ministry Watch, the average American church allocates about 97% of its total income to internal operations, buildings, payroll, insurance, marketing, programs, and infrastructure. That 97% does not include the congregants or community. It rarely feeds the poor, clothes the naked, or comforts the oppressed. It sustains the institution. It pays for salaries, staff retreats, and conference circuits. It maintains the buildings, grounds, technology, and brand presence. It covers pastoral wellness stipends, leadership retreats, media equipment, and, in some cases, golf club memberships and ministry development travel. Only 3% of the church's income typically leaves its walls to reach the world beyond. And even that fraction is often filtered through vague outreach initiatives or promotional campaigns meant to generate good optics. This is the new priestly economy, lavish maintenance draped in spiritual vocabulary. We call it missional resourcing or strategic expansion. We produce glossy annual reports filled with bar charts, buzzwords, and testimonies written in corporate PR tone. But intimacy is missing, because intimacy would reveal imbalance, and accountability would expose empire. 97% of the church's wealth circulates inside the church, among staff, systems, and structures, while 3% trickles outward. It's an economy of self-preservation, a holy tax shelter dressed up as revival. How bureaucracy became worship. Under Section 4958, the IRS can impose personal excise taxes of up to 200% for excess benefit transactions. Under Section 6033A3, churches are exempt from filing Public Form 990S, which every other non-profit must file for transparency. The result? Caesar defines the financial boundaries, and the church becomes both unaccountable to the public and dependent on the state's definition of what counts as reasonable, charitable, and permissible. The outcome is what we see now: bureaucracy masquerading as stewardship, compliance sold as integrity. The altar of obedience replaced by the desk of administration. The church that once trusted the Spirit now trusts the system, a system that rewards silence, institutionalizes safety, and sanctifies control. The theology of dependence. Dependence determines discipleship. The early believers depended on the Ruach HaKodesh. The modern church depends on tax exemption. If Caesar withdrew his recognition tomorrow, most megachurches would collapse within months. Their solvency rests on state favor, not divine faithfulness. Their survival is economic, not spiritual. This isn't cynicism, it's simple cause and effect. When the structure of the church mirrors the structure of empire, it will always end up reflecting its image. And that, biblically speaking, is the mark. The timing isn't the issue, the transformation is. The question isn't when Yeshua returns. The question is whether we'll still recognize his voice when he does. Because the mark of the beast isn't waiting in the future. It's forming now in the church's imagination. It doesn't arrive with horns and headlines. It arrives with bylaws, audits, and annual meetings. The danger isn't that we'll one day take the mark. It's that we already have, not as rebellion, but as routine. The church that once refused to bow has learned to comply. And compliance, when worship is at stake, is idolatry by another name. The countermark of the Lamb. But Revelation also shows another mark, a different inscription on the forehead of the faithful. The Lamb's name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. Revelation 14:1. Those who bear that mark are not perfect. They are persevering. They refuse the trade-off. They do not buy favor at the cost of faithfulness. They give without tax deduction, preach without state permission, and live without apology. They may lack the empire's approval, but they carry heaven's authority. Their worth isn't measured in budgets or branding, but in obedience. They are the true counterculture, the remnant marked not by compliance, but by covenant. A call to the shepherds. If you lead, lead with courage. If you preach, preach as if your exemption expired yesterday. If you give, give as though your receipt no longer matters. The church was never meant to be protected by Caesar. It was meant to be purified by fire. Its legitimacy was purchased by blood, not policy. Its covering is not the IRS, it is the Ruach. So, if the choice ever comes, and perhaps it already has, between being tax-exempt and being truth-filled, may we choose the cross every single time. Selah, a reflection for the reader. Pause. Look at your church's financial report, if they let you see it. How much of what enters the house of God ever leaves it for the sake of others? How many of the church's dollars are spent polishing its image rather than washing the world's feet? If 97% of what we call ministry stays within our walls, perhaps the mark isn't coming. Perhaps it's already branded on our balance sheets. Selah, disclaimer. This article does not claim that the institutional church has received the full and final mark of the beast as described in Revelation. Rather, it exposes how many of its patterns, doctrines, and alliances reflect the spirit and system that prepare people to accept it when it does come in full force. In other words, this is not the mark itself, but it is the primer that conditions hearts and minds to embrace it. Not every pastor is corrupt, and not every leader has sold out. There are still many sincere shepherds who love God and his people. But the pattern we're addressing here is widespread and real, and it demands honest conversation. I challenge every believer reading this to send their pastor this article in an email with this simple question. Is this true?